So, hey everyone, thank you for joining us for this ChangeNerd webcast. We have Shelly Hurley, who is awesome. She's very, very awesome. We connected early in the ChangeNerd community when I first launched it. So, Shelly, thank you for that. She's an experienced change management practitioner, and she works within the financial services industry. So, thank you for being here, Shelly.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Brian.
Absolutely, absolutely. So before we dive into the content, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, sure. So as Brian alluded to, I work at Vanguard. I have been there for about 14 years. And I've spent a majority, probably about 10 of those years, either in training and development or a change management and communications type role. So before entering change management, I was doing a lot of instructional design work, and I was being aligned to a lot of different change initiatives, which sparked my interest. So I've supported change from anything from small scale projects, supporting the training aspect of it, all the way up to supporting global transformations. And I currently, about that past 18 months, have been managing change from the HR division, enterprise-wide change related to performance management. So it was within my time in the change space that I actually got involved with our organization's community of practice, which was really immature at that time.
Yeah,
Got involved and eventually took over leadership, and we'll talk a lot about how that's evolved over the past 3 years.
that's awesome. So take us to the very beginning. I'm not sure. Was the community of practice at Vanguard, was it already established when you joined, or was it? You said you mentioned that it
Yeah,
was kind of
so
immature.
so when the community of practice started, I was not yet in a change role. I was still finishing out my tenure as an instructional designer, but I was leading a smaller community of practice for instructional designers.
Oh,
So it's
there you go.
interesting. I would say about 10 years ago, we stood up a group within HR called Organization Consulting Services. So it's really our internal consulting group of um, change management, organization design, workforce transition, and we brought in a lot of people who were ex-consultants.
Mm-hmm.
So they kind of worked from this centralized unit within HR, and as different areas around the business started implementing change, they would reach out to this organization consulting group, get a resource deployed, support the change initiative, and then that resource would go back into HR. So as that kind of evolved, so that went on for about 5 years. And then we started just experiencing so much change that it wasn't practical to deploy someone, allow them the time to get upskilled, do the consulting work, and then kind of hand it off to someone as their, extracurricular responsibility in that
Yeah.
business area. So we started looking at the structure of our change management resources. So at that time, that internal consulting group started looking at different ways to increase the change capacity across Vanguard, and
Yeah.
they recommended starting to position roles out in the business areas that were experiencing the change and hiring full-time resources. So that's where the shift started to happen. So now we had this internal consulting group, and we had change practitioners deployed in the business. And although there were about 5 or 6 that we knew of at the time,
Yeah.
change practitioners in the business, they were still looking for a lot of guidance from that consulting group in HR. So that's really how the community formed. They started it was my previous boss actually, and one of her colleagues that started reaching out to the internal consulting group, who then pointed them to each other and said, hey, you guys are both managing change in the same division. You guys should probably talk. They
Mm-hmm.
started meeting very organically, and then thought, if we're benefiting from this, why wouldn't we expand this and see who else would benefit? So they started to work more closely with the internal consulting group to determine whether there was appetite,
Yeah.
what a change management community of practice would focus on, and then what needed to be done to successfully stand that up. So that's where we really started to see the shift. And I was actually brought into those conversations because of my experience in the instructional design community. So I've been with it from the very beginning, not leading it from the very beginning.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's really cool. So obviously you're a connector, right? Building those communities. That's cool. So what was at a high level, what was that immediate focus when you and the team started having those conversations around, what's the real purpose of this COP? Can you tell us about that?
Yep. Yeah. So really the initial purpose was, like I said, we call our employees crew. So if I slip up and call them crew throughout this, I just mean our employees.
Yeah,
But basically we were putting people into these roles. We were not offering a formal training curriculum, and we were just saying kind of go ahead and manage change. So really all the change expertise at that time was in that little consulting group that was made up of maybe 15 people in an organization of 17,000. So really what we were trying to do in those early stages were take whatever we could get from the
yeah,
consulting group and then help each other learn about it and understand it better. And trying to figure out really how we could be more effective without recreating the wheel. So who has tools and templates that we can leverage, and what do you know from your experience that may help me in mine? So it was very organic, informal, just knowledge sharing from the beginning. And it was a group when we formally kicked off the community, it was a group of 11 people.
that's cool. And so it's been some time since you guys got started. So
Yep.
is the focus still the same, merely to kind of upskill others that, that don't focus on OCM full time, or is the focus the same, or is it different now?
That's a loaded question. So we have experienced quite a lot of change ourselves within the community of practice. Like I said, when we stood it up, we didn't really have anything to ground ourselves in except for like going out and Google searching things.
Yeah.
Then that consulting group created a change management training curriculum that anyone who had a formal change management role would go through this 2-day workshop and learn how we manage change at Vanguard. So that acted kind of as, your initiation into the community for about a year. So at that time, it was really focused on, okay, how do we continue the learning from that 2-day training session and then build our knowledge? About 2 years ago, we decided to outsource our change methodology and adopted the ProSci ADCAR methodology.
Mhm.
And that had us change our focus again on, okay, now we need to upskill each other on this new methodology, understand where, again, those tools and templates are going to come in handy. And then also, sharing the best practices. At this point, we had about 4 years under our belt of
Yeah.
different experiences that we could talk about managing change. So that became a big focus. I will say one of the lessons learned is that this last year, I think we were a little ambitious. So instead of focusing on us as a community, we had this aha moment late last year that if we could help the change capacity across Vanguard, build that change capacity across Vanguard,
Yeah.
then we wouldn't have to be the ones answering every question and facilitating every event. It would just be permeated throughout the organization. It was great in theory. It was really hard to pull off
In
with a
fact.
volunteer community of folks who really didn't sign up to educate the enterprise on change
Yeah.
management. So,
Yeah.
so I think one of the lessons learned was we really need to focus on what do we want to accomplish, what are the outcomes we're driving,
Yeah.
and then align our work around that instead of kind of pie in the sky, let's do everything in 1 year.
Wow. 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 So what were some of those challenges that you faced when trying to engage the business and trying to engage others? Because like you said, it is like a volunteer thing.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
you
so
all, oh, go ahead, I'll let you answer that question first.
sorry.
No, you're fine.
um, So I would say it's always a challenge to get people to volunteer, right? So you get people who are really excited at the beginning of the year, and then by the end of the first quarter, things have changed within their workspace and they're not really able to contribute as they thought they would. So there's always that push and pull. I think also this year we took probably 90% of our really engaged folks and put them into leadership positions, trying to lead their own bodies of work, which didn't leave a lot of engaged participation to help support those efforts. But in terms of engaging the business, I actually think we had an opposite experience, to where we held an expo. So we set up in the cafeteria. We had a big, couple hour event. We were focused on how do you lead through change? How do you just manage your day through change? How do you, become a change practitioner? We had all these different topics, and we got so much interest that now we had our group of core practitioners, but we had people who wanted to join the community that change, were just interested, maybe looking for a new career. So we got ourselves in a situation where people were looking for us to do so many different things that weren't really core to our purpose. And it had us look, internally to say, okay, so do we want to be an exclusive group that says, if you're not in a change role, you cannot be a part of our community? Or do we really need to think about, depending on what level of involvement you have with change management, you interact with our community in a different way? So we've gone with that approach, where we have our core forums for the change practitioners, where we focus on methodology and tools and templates. Then we also have what we call our outreach channels. So we have SharePoint, and we have our intranet, news articles, things that we're offering to that broad base without diluting the face-to-face interactions for our core practitioner base.
That's awesome. I like the way you and the team have kind of morphed the community based on the needs of Vanguard. That's pretty cool. So what are some successes? So you've had the COP now for what, at least 5 years? 5 years
Yeah.
plus?
Yeah. We're going into that 5th year.
Yeah. So what are some major successes?
So I think one of the things that we kind of hang our hat on are we've held 2 enterprise expos. So we've been able to hold a live event in our headquarters, and then share some of that information virtually with folks that aren't located in our headquarters.
Yeah.
We've been represented at the ACMP National Conference. I had the opportunity to speak about this topic there last year. And then in terms of what we've been able to do for the organization, we're actually at a point now where, although that internal consulting group technically owns the change domain at Vanguard, they have come out and said, this community is the change expertise community. This is where the expertise lies. So now we're looked at, and we're reached out to or given opportunities from that internal consulting group, whereas before, they were really viewed as the owners and the experts. We've been able to kind of change that balance, which I will say is not, it's welcomed by them as well. They're doing a lot more in the organization design and workforce transition space. Yeah. And we have a great relationship. They actually sponsor our community. So the head of that group is our executive sponsor. So we have a great rapport with them, but for them to recognize that today there's more change management expertise in the community than in their group, I think is a great success.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Something that I've been picking up on as I'm talking to different companies, and even I experienced myself on different projects. Obviously, Vanguard knows about change management, and they invest heavily in that space. But just using the term change management, especially when you're trying to build this COP, has it been limiting in any way? Or do you think, using a more broader name, I don't know, transformation, et cetera, whatever, using a broader term would have been more accepting to others in the business? What are your thoughts?
I don't think it's been narrowing. I think we have an interesting, and it's probably not unique to Vanguard, but we still struggle a lot with all you do is communication. Like change management is communication. So I do think that for what we expect of our core change management practitioners, that was the right scope. I think what we're finding now is that around the organization, there are groups being stood up around transformations, around project management. And it's just causing us to question, like, should we be involved? Should there be alignment? What are they talking about? What are we talking about? Because the last thing we want to do is oversaturate and confuse people. So it's been a lot more of trying to figure out what some of the other communities are doing and make linkages to them. So perfect example, a peer of mine and I read out to our project manager forum a couple of months ago, because it's still evident that a lot of project managers are doing change management. So it's cross-pollinating in that way. But I still think a lot of where Vanguard has opportunity is that the change practitioners are definitely considered more boots on the ground, managing the day-to-day. Not necessarily always involved in those initial upfront, program sponsor and leader meetings.
Yeah.
So I think there just would have been a little bit of a disconnect for where we were at the time with the types of activities our change folks were involved with.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And then I have one question, and then we have some questions from the community. Let's talk about investment. So, right, let's talk about what Vanguard did at a high level, no details, in regard to making an investment for this COP, and then let's talk about minimal viable, right, for an organization that's interested in starting a COP tomorrow. Right?
Yep.
What in regards to investment, what were the investment costs associated with launching this COP and even sustaining it?
Yeah, I think for launching it, there wasn't a huge investment. It was very much crew or employee driven, right? Like we wanted it. I think where the investment came in would be the time commitment of that executive sponsor. So, so we were very careful up front around what we were actually using their time for. And I will say I credit the original man who was in that role, because he pushed on the team to really think, like, I'm not attaching my name to just some group that wants to have a book club every month. Like, what are you trying to accomplish through this? Why am I the right person? Why is this the right time? So I feel like setting all of that up front was super key. And then we determined, the engagement structure that we met with him was on a quarterly basis. So it wasn't a huge commitment from him. And then internally, we kind of did everything in volunteer time. Where the investment did come in was about 3 years ago was the first time we asked for a monetary investment, and that was to stand up this expo that I was talking about. So that was a pretty decent cost that we had to put a proposal together and go and get the funding and put the event on that way. But other than that, like, those are the big costs. The things that we've done internally that have been driven by the COP that have costs associated with it was our transition to ProSci. And we had to really think through how we were going to tell people, we're putting you in a change role and now your manager has to spend $5,000 to get you trained up. So that was an interesting shift.
Yeah.
And then in terms of ongoing kind of cost, I really feel like the reason we've been successful is because we've utilized a lot of the tools and technologies we have internally, and it hasn't been a big disruptor. So there hasn't been a lot of need to go ask for additional funding or things like that.
That's cool. Thanks for that. Let's see if we can get Daryl into the conversation.
Hi, Shelly. Hey, Brian. How you doing?
I'm doing well, man.
Hey, Shelly. Curious, similar to you, I've had the privilege of being able to stand up a change management practice, and I hadn't heard you discuss anything regarding saturation. So I've got a couple of questions, but the first one is, what's the role of change management, and what is it that you're supposed to deliver to the leadership at Vanguard?
Can I ask a clarifying question? Is that in terms of the community or in terms of like my day job?
I think of those as one and the same. So
Okay.
I guess it would be the community of practice. What is it that the leadership expects that the change management practitioners are delivering to them?
Yeah, so we do have a series of services and, following the ADKAR model, everything from the entire engagement plan to the sponsor roadmap to some of those deliverables.
Yeah.
That would be more of the day job. I think in terms of what they expect from us as a community of practice, and that's my fault. Maybe I should have clarified really what our community is intended for, but it's really a peer-based community to help one another learn. So I don't think that there's anything that they expect coming out of the community. I don't think there's anything they did expect coming out of the community, but we've shifted that to where we have a lot of actually offerings on change leadership. So really helping them understand, because we had to fight that stigma of, oh, okay, I'm the manager and you're the change manager, so like I'm wiping my hands, you've got it. And we've done a lot of educating on really what it means to lead through change, and then obviously backing that up with templates, tools, resources, everything that can kind of make it easier for them. So I think they've come to expect support from the community of practice, but initially I think it was just a way or an opportunity, if they did have change practitioners on their team, to get them involved and get them some upskilling.
Well said. Well said. Well said. I love that. Daryl, just to jump in, Shelly, I love that, because the hardest part about change management or even work that involves transformation is like getting the executives and leadership to kind of change their mindset. So even if that's a organic benefit of building a community, right? You're helping people learn how to navigate through change. It's a beautiful thing. So that's awesome.
Yeah, and that sparked for me, Brian, actually, when we were thinking about leadership, we did about this time last year when we were planning for this year's activities, one of the things that we worked with the internal consulting group on was, where does our line stop and yours start? And we said it was really at that, like, we'll focus on broad change leadership, but when we get into executive sponsorship and the importance of it, we still think that kind of deserves to come from that group, because they are the more senior, they're the ones dealing with the executives on a more regular basis. So we do have a little bit of delineation there.
That's awesome. All right, Daryl, you had another question?
I did. Given the fact that you guys, you consider yourself to be more on the business readiness and preparing the organization for the changes that have been decided upon, do you deliver a visual model of saturation of any kind? And if you do, what does that look like in different to what project managers report?
Yeah, so that's the short answer is no. We've struggled a lot with that. We don't have any type of enterprise function or view of all the change happening across Vanguard. So that's been something that we've been really struggling to produce. And I think we realized this year that we're not in the best position to produce it. So I had mentioned earlier some other groups that are being stood up. One is this transformation office. And that's the type of thing that they're going to be looking at to see, at any given level or role, what is their level of saturation. I think we know, broad speaking, that we are completely oversaturated with change at Vanguard, but we've also kind of come to accept that this is going to be the new norm. So really trying to help people understand what's an awareness need versus an act need, doing what we can. But no, to answer the question, unfortunately, we've not been able to produce a saturation, view across the enterprise.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Not a complete one.
I had to write that down as you were speaking. We need to have a webcast on saturation. And it's not just a change thing, it's an organizational thing. I've been a part of executive meetings where we're trying to understand all the change that's happening throughout the organization. But then if you look under that, it's almost like, okay, do we have enough resources to support all of these projects? And if you look at the resources even more critically, it's like, do we have enough like subject matter experts, right? Because, like when you're driving all of this change, you're producing all these projects, you're organization tends to lean on the same people.
Yep.
So it's like there's like a lot of layers when you start thinking about saturation. I'm a big advocate. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And I think one of the things that we struggle with is we have so many, so we have 11 divisions and they're all going through some level of transformation. Just keeping who those people were and where they were in the various changes, because they're transforming. And by the time you would go back and relook at what you put together, that group doesn't exist anymore. And wait, that's turned into that group and there's a new change and this one's that. So it was a lot more than we were able to kind of bite off in our volunteer time.
Oh man.
But it's a great topic.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So so we're close to the end. I want to be mindful of your time as well. So Shelly, for someone or a team who wants to launch a COP, what's the number one piece of advice that you would give to them?
Yeah, I think start small, right? Test and learn. I think one of the reasons we were successful is because this did start with a core group of 11 people, and it was very clear early on what we were trying to do. We spent a lot of time up front talking about roles and responsibilities, what it meant to be a community member, what the roles of the leads versus the members were versus the sponsor. And then we really involved that first year, everyone had a hand in what was being presented, what was being shared. And I think there was a lot of accountability. Now that we're at a group of over 150 people, we still have our core 40 to 50 people that show up to every meeting and engage in every dialogue. But I think it's been harder to manage as it's gotten larger. So I would definitely say start small, spend the time up front on all those important project management type responsibilities. And then the other thing that I think is instrumental to our success is the governance. So make sure if governance is something that's important in your organization, or that sponsorship model, that type of oversight, I think that having that support and that backing, especially early on, was key to our success.
Awesome. Shelly, thank you so much for your time. And this concludes the webcast. For everyone who joined as well, thank you for taking time out of your schedules.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, Brian.
Absolutely. All right. Talk soon. Take care.
Bye.